Inside the glass-walled lobby of Black Ridge Holdings, a man in a plain gray jacket stood quietly at the reception desk. The receptionist looked him up and down, her smile, thin, almost amused. No appointment. No business card. No tailored suit. She told him flatly that the CEO did not meet walk-ins. He didn't argue. He only said 4 words, low and even. "You'll regret this." Within the hour, the executive boardroom doors swung open, and every senior leader in the room rose to their feet for him. The morning Lucas Hale walked into Black Ridge Holdings, the city was still wet from an overnight rain. The tower rose 42 floors above the financial district, its glass facade catching the gray light, its lobby polished to a mirror finish. Inside, everything moved with the quiet precision of money. Heels clicked on marble. Elevators chimed. Men in tailored suits passed through the security gates, without breaking stride, the kind of men who never had to explain who they were. Lucas did not break stride either, but he did not belong to the same picture. He wore a gray canvas jacket, dark jeans, and a worn leather satchel slung over one shoulder. He was 41, lean, with the kind of stillness people sometimes mistook for fatigue. He had been awake since 2 in the morning, working through a system flaw he had not been paid to find. He had decided somewhere around 4 that he could not let it sit any longer. Behind the reception desk sat Rachel Bennett. She had been with the company for 3 years and considered herself an expert at reading people in under 5 seconds. By her measurement, the man approaching her now did not require a second look. No tailored suit, no company badge, no sleek leather portfolio. She straightened her posture and arranged the polite processional smile she reserved for the wrong kind of visitor. "Good morning," Lucas said. "I need to speak with Vanessa Cole. It's urgent." The smile arrived right on cue. "Do you have an appointment, sir?" "No, but she'll want to hear this. Ms. Cole doesn't take walk-ins. If you'd like to leave your information, I can pass it along to the appropriate department." "I've already left my information, 6 times, through your contact form last week." Something in Rachel's expression shifted, then not toward concern, but toward a quiet, practiced amusement. Her gaze drifted over his jacket, his satchel, the absence of a business card on the counter, and she arrived at a conclusion that satisfied her. Her voice softened the way condescension always softens, smooth and almost kind. "I understand you feel it's important, but our executive office uses its own intake process. There are channels for this kind of thing, sir. You won't pass it along." "Excuse me. You haven't passed any of the others along, or someone above you hasn't." Her smile snapped flat. She reached for the desk phone with the calm of a woman summoning consequences. "Security to the lobby, please." 2 floors above her, in an office of glass and brushed steel, Oliver Grant was watching the same morning unfold from a different vantage point. He was 46, expensively dressed, and carried himself with the calm of a man who had spent 15 years learning how to make problems disappear before anyone noticed they had existed. On his second monitor, an internal flag blinked. A new entry in the lobby log. Visitor name Lucas Hale. No appointment. He was not surprised. He had been watching that name surface for almost 2 weeks. First in the contact form queue where he had quietly intercepted it. Then in a forwarded email from compliance, which had vanished into a folder no one else could open. Then in a voicemail he had deleted personally after listening to it twice. Each time the name returned, it returned a little louder, and Oliver had begun to understand that this one would not simply go away. He picked up his phone and dialed reception. "Rachel, the walk-in. Is he still there?" "Yes, Mr. Grant. Security is on the way." "Don't escalate. Have him removed quietly. No incident report. No name in the visitor log. Understood?" "Understood, sir." He set the receiver down and returned to his second monitor, where a series of internal financial dashboards glowed in soft greens and blues. Every figure on the screen had been by his careful design, smoothed into exactly the shape Vanessa Cole expected to see. He had built the smoothing slowly over months in increments small enough that no quarterly review could catch them. He had been very careful. Lucas Hale was the only variable he had not been able to control. On the 38th floor, Vanessa Cole was reviewing those same dashboards. She was 34, the youngest chief executive in Black Ridge's history, and she had inherited the company from a father who had built it on instinct. She had rebuilt it on process. Where he had trusted his gut, she trusted structure, quarterly audits, escalation protocols, layered approvals. She believed with quiet conviction that a properly designed system could not be fooled. Her chief of staff, Marcus Riley, tapped lightly at the door. He had served under her since her first month in the role, and he was the only person in the building who could interrupt her morning without an appointment. "Ma'am, the lobby reports a walk-in asking for you, a Mr. Lucas Hale. Says it's urgent. Mr. Grant has already handled it." Vanessa did not look up from her screen. The name registered somewhere at the edge of her attention, but the second sentence dissolved it before it could settle. Mr. Grant has already handled it. That was how the system was supposed to work. That was the whole point of having a chief operating officer she trusted. She gave a small nod and said only, "Thank you, Marcus." It was a small choice made at a clean desk on a quiet morning. No drama. No alarm. Just a single, almost invisible decision to trust the protocol. Trust the man whose job it was to know which names belonged in her calendar and which did not. Later, she would remember this moment as the one she could have prevented everything from. At the time, it felt like nothing at all. Down in the lobby, 2 security officers had arrived. They were polite. They asked Lucas to step away from the desk. He did. He adjusted the strap of his satchel, looked once at Rachel, who was already typing again. Eyes deliberately fixed on her screen, and turned toward the revolving door without resistance. He did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He did not even look offended. He just walked the way a man walks when he has already decided that arguing is a waste of breath. Just before the door, he stopped. He did not turn fully. He spoke just loud enough for the desk to hear, and for the 2 officers to feel it land somewhere behind their ribs. "You'll regret this." Rachel did not look up. The officers exchanged a glance, shrugged, and watched him push through the glass into the rain. Outside, the morning had gone darker, the plaza shining wet beneath a low gray sky. Lucas pulled the satchel closer to his side and walked toward the parking garage at the same unhurried pace he had walked in with. He did not look angry. He looked like a man who had just given the system one last chance to do the right thing and watched it fail in real time. In the parking garage, he sat in his car for a long minute without starting it. The dashboard clock blinked from 9:11 to 9:12. He took out his phone, scrolled past 2 unread messages from a neighbor, and stopped on a calendar reminder he had set for himself the night before. Pick up dry cleaning by 6. Groceries. Small, ordinary obligations from the small, ordinary life he had built around his own hours. He had not planned for the morning to derail any of it. He breathed out slowly. Then he reached for the satchel, pulled out a slim laptop, and opened a folder of files he had been preparing for the last 72 hours. The folder was named simply Black Ridge Final Notice. He looked at it for a moment, then closed the laptop and rested his hand on top of it. He had warned them politely. He had warned them through every official channel. He scrolled through his contacts and stopped on a name he had not dialed in nearly a decade. Daniel Webb, board member. Old enough to remember why Lucas had been hired the first time. He pressed the call button. The ringtone barely had time to settle before Webb picked up. Lucas spoke for 90 seconds. Webb did not interrupt once. When Lucas finished, there was a beat of silence, and then Webb said, only, "I'll be there in 10 minutes. Wait at the south entrance." The call ended. Lucas set the phone face down on the passenger seat and watched the rain blur the garage's exit ramp. The next door he opened was not going to be a polite one. 11 minutes after Lucas walked out of the lobby, A black town car pulled up at the south entrance of Black Ridge Holdings. Daniel Webb stepped out first. He was 68, silver-haired, and moved with the unhurried authority of a man who had served on the Black Ridge board for 22 years. He had taken a single phone call in the back of that town car and made a single decision in under 30 seconds. He was the kind of man who only made decisions like that for people he had reason to trust. Lucas met him at the curb. They did not shake hands. Webb only nodded once and said, "Stay close." At the security gate, the officer on duty straightened the moment he saw Webb's face. Webb tapped his board badge against the reader, signed Lucas in personally on the executive guest log under his own name, and added a short notation in the comment field. Board guest. No escort required. The officer looked at the notation, looked at Lucas, and waved them both through without a word. 2 floors above them, Oliver Grant was still smoothing the morning's numbers when his second monitor flagged a new entry. Not the lobby this time. The south entrance. A board badge had cleared the executive floor at 9:41. He frowned and pulled up the camera feed, and on the screen he saw exactly what he had spent 2 weeks trying to prevent. Lucas Hale walking beside Daniel Webb, heading directly toward the executive corridor. Oliver moved fast. He stood, straightened his cuffs, and walked toward the strategy room where the senior leadership meeting had been underway for the last 20 minutes. He had 3 minutes, maybe 4. There was, he told himself, still a version of this morning he could control. There was always a version. In her own corridor, Vanessa Cole had spent the last hour inside a forecast review that had felt for reasons she could not name slightly off. The numbers were clean, the slides were clean, but operations had logged a delayed reconciliation report on Friday, and a compliance ping had vanished from her queue on Monday without explanation, and the small accumulation of small things had begun that morning to make a sound she could not quite hear yet. The strategy room sat on the 38th floor, with glass on 3 sides, and the city spread out beneath it like a map. 7 senior leaders sat around the long table, mid-discussion on a quarterly forecast that, unbeknownst to any of them, had been cleaned to within an inch of its life. Vanessa sat at the head of the table, fountain pen tapping once against the open page of her notebook. The door opened without a knock. Daniel Webb stepped through first. Behind him came the man in the gray canvas jacket. Around the table, every head turned. 3 of the executives, the older ones, the ones who had lived through the worst quarter Black Ridge had ever survived, recognized the second man's face before they recognized the situation. They did not announce him. They did not need to. They simply set their pens down and almost in unison rose to their feet. Vanessa watched it happen, and the not understanding of it landed harder than anything that had happened to her that month. "Daniel," she said evenly, "I wasn't told you were coming in." "I wasn't either," Webb answered. "Until 20 minutes ago. I believe you've already been informed of his attempt to reach you this morning. You may want to sit down for the rest." Lucas had not moved past the doorway. He carried only his satchel, set it on the corner of the long table, and pulled out the slim laptop. He did not raise his voice. He did not look at anyone in the room, except Vanessa. "My name is Lucas Hale. 10 years ago I was brought in by your father to redesign Black Ridge's risk architecture. I have not worked with this company since. 2 weeks ago I noticed something in your public filings that should not be there. I tried to reach you through your contact form. I was filtered. I tried compliance. I was filtered. This morning I came in person. I was removed." Vanessa's gaze did not leave him. She heard the words. She also heard beneath them the much larger sentence underneath. Every one of those routes ran through the same office that had stood for 4 years between her and the rest of the company, smoothing what reached her desk and what did not. The door opened a second time. Oliver came in, fast smile, already arranged voice, already smooth. "Daniel." "Vanessa. I apologize for the disruption. Mr. Hale has been attempting to reach the executive office through unofficial channels for some time now. We have a protocol for exactly this kind of contact. There's no reason to interrupt the strategy session." "There's every reason," Lucas said without turning toward him. He rotated the laptop so the screen faced Vanessa. On it was a single dashboard, plain and unstyled, no logos, no formatting. These are your real numbers, the ones the system actually generated, pulled from the source ledger this morning. Compare them to the ones in your hand. Vanessa looked down at her notebook. She looked at the screen. The two columns did not match. Not by much. By exactly the amount a careful man would smooth over the course of 3 quarters, in increments small enough that no single review could catch them. Her pen, which had been moving along the margin of her page, stopped moving. "This isn't possible," Oliver said. His voice had cooled, found its corporate floor. "There's a reconciliation process. Every data set is checked against the source 3 times before it reaches this room. If there were a discrepancy of that size, it would have been flagged automatically." "It was flagged," Lucas said. 3 times. By the system itself on 3 separate dates. Each flag was dismissed by a single user account, with the override note set to manual review complete. The user account is yours. The room went still, in the particular way. Rooms go still when no one wants to be the first to breathe. Eleanor Marsh, the chief financial officer, a woman who had been with Blackridge longer than Vanessa had been alive, turned her head slowly in Oliver's direction and did not turn it back. Vanessa closed the notebook. She did not raise her voice. She did not look at Oliver yet. "How long," she said, "has this been happening?" 11 months, Lucas answered. "It would have surfaced in your year-end audit. If the year-end audit hadn't been redesigned 6 months ago by the same office that dismissed the flags." Oliver tried again, more carefully this time. "Vanessa, this is exactly the kind of accusation that requires due process. We can't allow an outside contractor to walk into a strategy meeting and—" "Oliver." Her voice was quiet, almost gentle, and that was the thing in it that frightened the room. "I'd like you to wait outside." "Vanessa." "That wasn't a request." He did not move for a long beat. He looked at Webb, who looked back at him with the polite, immovable face of a man who had already decided how the rest of the morning was going to go. Oliver turned and walked out. The door closed behind him, with the soft, expensive sound of a building designed to swallow consequence. Vanessa kept her eyes on the laptop screen. The 2 columns sat there, still not matching, and behind them sat 11 months of decisions. She had made staffing decisions, capital decisions, public statements, every one of them resting on a number that had been arranged to comfort her. The man who had arranged them had reported to her every Monday morning for 4 years. The man who had tried to warn her had been escorted out of her lobby earlier that morning on her watch, with her implicit permission, and only 1 sentence had crossed his lips on the way out. She lifted her gaze from the screen. "Sit down, Mr. Hale. Walk me through it from the beginning." Lucas sat. He did not take the chair Oliver had vacated, which sat closest to Vanessa but the one beside it. The laptop stayed where it was, screen turned toward the head of the table. The 7 executives remained standing for a moment longer, then settled back into their chairs in the slow, careful way people sit when the room has changed shape around them. He walked her through it without theatrics. He opened the source ledger first, the raw one, the one no internal dashboard ever displayed. He showed her where the smoothing had begun, a single line item in the 2nd quarter of the previous year. 1 decimal place reassigned in a routing table, the kind of edit that looked like a typo for the first 30 days, and like a pattern by the 90th. He showed her the override log, the user account, the timestamps. He showed her the 3 system flags and the 3 dismissals, and the small, tidy comment field on each one. Manual review complete. Same phrasing every time. Same office every time. Vanessa watched the screen. She did not interrupt. Halfway through the 3rd quarter, she set her fountain pen down on the closed notebook and did not pick it up again. By the time Lucas reached the redesigned audit framework, the one Oliver had personally championed at the board level 6 months earlier, citing efficiency, citing modernization, citing every word she had wanted to hear. She had stopped looking at the screen and started looking at her own hands. The crisis, when it arrived inside her, did not arrive as panic. It arrived as a kind of cold clarity that felt almost like relief. 11 months, 47 Monday morning briefings, 2 earnings calls in which she had personally repeated on the record numbers that had been arranged for her comfort. A round of senior hiring she had approved on the strength of a forecast that did not exist. A capital allocation she had signed 3 weeks ago on a Tuesday, while Oliver sat across from her and nodded. What she felt more than anger was a slow recognition of how she had been moved. Not bullied, not threatened. Moved gently week after week by a man whose entire job was to know which information she wanted to see, and to make sure that was the only information that reached her. She had built the structure that allowed it. She had hired the man who used it. And 90 minutes ago, she had nodded once at her chief of staff's desk and let the last warning the company was ever going to give her walk out of the lobby in the rain. When Lucas finished, the room was quiet in the way boardrooms rarely are. Eleanor Marsh was the first to speak. If those numbers are real, the year-end disclosures we filed last quarter are materially false. They're real, Lucas said. I'd recommend you not file anything else until an independent audit confirms the scope. Vanessa lifted her head. Her voice was steady, and it carried the room without rising. Marcus, the chief of staff who had been waiting just beyond the glass, stepped in. 3 things, she said. First, get me the senior partner at Halverson and Reed on the phone, not their account team, the senior partner. I want a fully independent forensic audit on the books, scoped to the last 14 months starting today. Second, freeze all outbound financial communication. Investor relations, press, regulatory filings, until the audit defines the scope of what we have to disclose. Third, escort Oliver Grant out of the building. He does not return to his office. He does not access his terminal. His credentials are revoked. As of this minute, not the end of the day. Marcus wrote nothing down. He nodded once and left to make the calls. Vanessa turned to the executives at the table. She did not soften her face for them. I owe each of you an acknowledgement. For the past 4 years, I have run this company on the assumption that a well-designed process is harder to corrupt than a person. I was wrong about that. A process is exactly as honest as the people who control its inputs. I trusted one office with too much of that control, and I did not check it. And we are sitting here because of that decision. Not because of Oliver, because of me. Eleanor Marsh opened her mouth, then closed it. The head of strategy, a younger man named Peter Hollis, looked down at the table. None of them disagreed. They had all watched Vanessa run the building. They had all seen the gate Oliver had become. A few of them, she suspected, now had seen it more clearly than she had, and had said nothing because saying something to her had stopped being easy somewhere around the 2nd year. She turned back to Lucas. You said you stopped working with this company 10 years ago. Why? Your father offered me a permanent role. I declined. I prefer to work on systems, not inside them. He closed the laptop. I came back this time because the architecture I built for him is the one being used to hide the discrepancy. I felt a certain obligation. To him, to the work, she studied him for a long beat. The man who had walked into her boardroom in a gray canvas jacket with no badge and no business card had not raised his voice once in the last 40 minutes. He had not asked for credit. He had not asked for damages. He had not, in fact, asked for anything. He had simply opened a laptop and shown her the truth her own building had refused to deliver. Mr. Hale, she said, the forensic audit is going to take 90 days. The remediation of the architecture is going to take longer. I'd like to formally retain you as a strategic partner on both, independent, reporting directly to me and to the board, whatever rate you set. I don't take retainers from companies in active investigation. Then take it from the board. Daniel, Webb, who had been listening from the side of the room with his arms folded, gave a single nod. The board can engage him directly. We'll route it through the audit committee. There's precedent. Lucas considered for a moment the way he considered most things, without visible weight, but with the small adjustment of a man who took the question seriously. On 2 conditions. The first is that I report findings to the full board, not through any single executive. The second is that the contact form on your public site routes to compliance, not to the Chief Operating Officer's inbox. Whoever fills that role next. Done, Vanessa said. Both. He extended his hand across the corner of the table. She took it. The handshake was brief and unceremonial, and in the cinematic logic of the room, it was the moment something quietly, structurally shifted in the building. The executive stood again as he gathered his satchel. This time it was not surprise that lifted them. It was the slower, more deliberate gesture of professionals acknowledging a peer. Webb walked over and put a hand briefly on Lucas's shoulder, the way old men acknowledge debts they have not had the chance to pay back yet. Eleanor Marsh met his eyes and gave a single tight nod that said, more clearly than any sentence, "Thank you for not letting it get worse." Before Lucas reached the door, Eleanor crossed the room to Vanessa's chair. She did not sit. She lowered her voice so only Vanessa could hear. 2 years ago, I flagged a routing change Oliver pushed through during the second quarter close. He told me you had personally signed off on it. I let it go. I should not have. She held Vanessa's gaze for a moment longer. I'm telling you now, because if the audit asks, I want it on record, that I knew sooner than I acted. Vanessa absorbed that without flinching. Thank you, Eleanor. Put it in writing this afternoon. We'll handle it cleanly. Eleanor nodded once and stepped back to her chair. Lucas did not linger. He shouldered the satchel, exchanged a final look with Vanessa, brief, even almost neutral, and walked out the way he had come in. The corridor was quiet. The morning's rain had stopped. Through the glass at the end of the hall, the city was beginning to brighten into the dull silver of a day that had decided to clear. Down the corridor near the bank of executive offices, 2 men in dark jackets were already stationed outside Oliver Grant's door. They were not corporate security. They had been brought in from a private firm Marcus kept on retainer for situations the company could not afford to handle internally. They wore identification clipped to their belts and stood with the easy patience of men accustomed to waiting out the last bad minute of a bad morning. Oliver came out of the office carrying a single thin folder. His suit jacket was over his arm. The smile he had walked in with at 7 that morning was nowhere on his face now. He did not look at the 2 men. He did not look at the receptionist outside the executive bullpen, who had stood up at her desk and was pretending to be on a call. He walked to the service elevator, the one used for catering and freight, because Marcus had specified that the lobby cameras should not record his exit. The elevator doors closed on him without ceremony. Lucas took the executive elevator down alone. On the 7th floor, 2 compliance officers stepped in, carrying a banker's box. They did not know who he was. They nodded politely, the way people nod at men they assume belong somewhere above them, and rode the rest of the way down in silence. In the lobby, Rachel Bennett was at the desk. She had been there all morning. She had watched on the small camera feed at the corner of her screen the 2 private security men escort Oliver Grant out of the South Freight Bay 15 minutes earlier, his stride too fast for the composure he was attempting to keep on his face. She had not yet been told what was happening. She did not need to be. 3 years at a desk like hers taught a person what an unannounced board visit and a forensic team in the freight elevator added up to. When Lucas stepped out of the elevator, she recognized him before her mind caught up to the recognition. The gray canvas jacket, the leather satchel, the same calm walk. He was halfway across the marble lobby before she fully understood that he was the same man she had dismissed in under 5 seconds at 9 that morning. The polite processional smile she had given him then was the most useful tool she owned, and she had used it on a man who had just spent the last hour inside the room she would never be invited into. Her throat went tight in a way it had not gone tight in years. She did not stand. She did not call after him. She did not even in her head attempt to construct an apology she would not have known how to deliver. She only watched him walk and felt with a clarity that would take her several quiet evenings to fully process that she had been a small, careful instrument inside something much larger than she had understood, and that she had been wrong about it in a way that had nothing to do with him and everything to do with the way she had decided very young to read people. She thought briefly of the phone call she would receive later that afternoon from Marcus Riley's office. She did not yet know it was coming, but she understood, watching Lucas push through the revolving door, that her morning was going to end very differently from how it had begun. He did not look at her as he passed. He pushed through the revolving door and stepped out into the plaza and was gone. Upstairs in the boardroom, Vanessa Cole stood at the long window. The strategy meeting had been suspended. The audit calls had begun. Marcus was assembling a list of every decision she had signed in the last 11 months that would need to be reviewed against the corrected ledger. The number was going to be long. She knew that. She had begun already to make peace with what the next quarter of her professional life was going to consist of. What she kept returning to was not the fraud. The fraud was a problem. Problems she knew how to solve. What she kept returning to was the small, almost invisible moment at her desk, that morning, the nod, the thank you. Marcus, the willingness to let one person's filter do its work without ever asking what it was filtering for. She had spent 4 years building a structure she believed could not be fooled. The structure had not been fooled. It had done exactly what it was designed to do, which was to deliver to her precisely the version of reality the person controlling its inputs wanted her to see. She turned away from the window. She picked up her fountain pen. She opened the notebook to a fresh page, and at the top of it, she wrote a single line in her own handwriting. Trust the source, not the summary. Then she sat down and began the long work of going back through 11 months of her own decisions, one Monday morning at a time, with her eyes open this time. Lucas Hale crossed the plaza in the brightening morning, the satchel against his hip, the gray jacket darkened along the shoulders from the earlier rain. He did not look back at the tower. He had said on his way out the first time that they would regret it. He had not said it as a threat. He had said it as a fact, the way an engineer states the load tolerance of a beam. They had regretted it. The regret had cost them 11 months of arranged comfort and one chief operating officer and an audit that would dominate their next 90 days. It would cost them more before it was finished, but the regret had also bought them on the same morning the only thing that actually mattered. They had stopped looking at the summary. They had started looking at the source. And the man who had insisted on the difference, who had been turned away at the lobby of his own former architecture, by a smile and a phone call and a quiet protocol designed to filter him out, had been the only one in the building that morning who had ever been looking at the source in the first place. He reached his car in the garage at 9 minutes past 10. He sat behind the wheel for a moment without starting the engine. The dry cleaning, the groceries, the rest of the day which would have to continue happening regardless of what had just happened on the 38th floor. He pulled the calendar reminder back up on his phone, looked at it, and tapped it closed. Then he started the car, eased out of the garage, and drove toward the rest of his ordinary afternoon. Behind him, the tower stood in the brightening light, 42 floors of glass and brushed steel, beginning the slow, careful work of becoming an honest building again.